Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a story that feels like a slow-burning wildfire in the heart of a family. One where loyalty, betrayal, and quiet cunning mingle like smoke and flame. You probably won't survive this story without flinching at least once, because it starts with those little moments you don't see coming. The subtle glances, the hushed whispers, the way someone pauses just a bit too long when you ask a simple question about inheritance or family plans. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're cozy at home tonight, maybe in your living room or kitchen, know that this story could very well be happening in a house just like yours. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It begins on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind where sunlight slices through blinds at odd angles, dust motes dancing like tiny witnesses to secrets. I walk into the living room and immediately notice the grandchildren are clustered quietly in the corner, leaning toward each other as though the mere act of sitting in my presence requires stealth. There's a tension in the air, a nervous energy that feels like static electricity before a storm. It's funny how family dynamics can shift so subtly. Mainstream studies suggest that grandchildren often unconsciously side with the parent they perceive as weaker in disputes over inheritance or household control. People still debate whether these early alliances are protective instincts or calculated maneuvers, and tonight it feels like both. The parents, my adult children, are busy somewhere else in the house, loudly rearranging what I later realize are minor household items. Books, pens, a vase that always seem too delicate to move. They talk over one another the way people do when they're trying to assert authority, but there's a hollow edge to their voices. Oddly, I recall reading about a cultural ritual in some European families where elders leave small written instructions for grandchildren about unseen family obligations, and these notes are meant to pass down wisdom, or in some cases, to alert the younger generation to subtle manipulations. I can't help but think that in some ways our grandchildren might already be privy to such unwritten instructions, even without any note. Their eyes flick between me and the hallway, registering every shift of tone, every raised eyebrow. I sink into the armchair near the window, feeling the slight warmth of the afternoon sun on my arm, and try to observe without interfering. One of the grandchildren, little Emma, leans forward, with her elbows on her knees, whispering something just beneath audibility to her cousin Lucas. Their heads tilt together like co-conspirators. I notice the way their body language, he almost screams, "We know more than you think," though they're careful not to be overt. Mainstream psychology notes that children and teens often develop an almost instinctive radar for adult deceit, particularly in situations where money inheritance or property is involved. But what's remarkable here is how composed they are. Too composed, almost like they're rehearsing patience as a performance. The house feels unusually quiet for a midweek afternoon. Normally, there's the soft hum of the refrigerator or the distant buzz of traffic or the faint clatter of a neighbor's dog. Tonight, it's almost silent, as if even the walls are holding their breath. I hear the faint scrape of a chair from the dining room. My children have noticed me watching them, but continue with the pretense of casual conversation. There's something almost ritualistic about their actions, shuffling papers, adjusting chairs, speaking in clipped sentences. Fringe legal studies on inheritance manipulation mention that small, repetitive behaviors like moving items or restating instructions can serve as subtle attempts to assert control without direct confrontation. I watch them half amused, half uneasy. Emma shifts slightly. Her voice a whisper now, but her eyes meet mine for a fleeting moment. It's a small, almost imperceptible nod, like a secret handshake between her and me alone. A shiver runs through my spine, not because of fear, but recognition. My grandchildren are alert, aware, loyal in ways that my adult children cannot fathom. There's a subtle brilliance in their attention, a quiet form of resistance. Mainstream family research often underestimates the role of grandchildren as mediators, guardians, or even covert supporters in inheritance disputes. But here, they are already acting in a protective capacity. People still debate whether this early alignment is ethical or strategic, but I sense that tonight it will be pivotal. I reach for the small glass of iced tea on the side table. The condensation drips slowly onto the polished wood, a sensory detail I cling to as a grounding point amid the tension. The smell of the tea mingles with the faint aroma of vanilla candles burning somewhere else in the room. It's almost cinematic, the way the environment reflects the subtle drama unfolding. There's humor here, too, if you can see it, the adults bustling with authority, completely oblivious to the quiet observation of the younger generation, who could almost teach a masterclass in strategic patience. I let a small smile escape. They have no idea yet how much I've noticed. Then Emma does something that freezes me mid-sip. She picks up a crumpled piece of paper from the floor near the couch, something my children didn't notice falling from a file folder, and smooths it out on her lap. Her small fingers trace the faint writing. It's subtle, yet loaded with significance. Fringe customs in certain legal cultures include leaving hidden instructions or codicils for younger family members, often tucked into mundane objects. It's rare but possible, and right now I can't help wondering if that scrap could be something like that, an overlooked key to understanding the deeper schemes at play. Lucas leans over, murmuring softly to Emma, their heads almost touching. I can't hear the words, but the gestures are deliberate, pointing, nodding, tilting of heads. It's as if they're orchestrating a silent counterplan, anticipating the moves of adults who think they control the narrative. Mainstream sociology would call this subtle intergenerational negotiation, but it feels more like a secret rebellion, a soft but firm pushback against injustice. People still debate whether such early forms of negotiation are learned or instinctual, but watching them, I see a mix of both. The clock ticks somewhere above the fireplace. Each second resonates in the quiet house, emphasizing the rhythm of attention and waiting. I settle deeper into the chair, feeling both amusement and admiration for my young allies. There's a strange comfort in knowing that even amid the petty authority games, the whispered alliances, and the hushed manipulations, some elements of loyalty remain steadfast. Oddly enough, in many cultures, grandparents act as moral compasses, often more subtly influential than parents in disputes over inheritance or control. That principle seems alive here tonight in the quiet loyalty, reflected in the glances and gestures of my grandchildren. I stretch my arms and let out a small laugh, one of those nervous, low-volume chuckles. Humor can be a shield, after all, especially when navigating tense family dynamics. I imagine this moment frozen in a photograph, the sunlight catching dust motes, the grandchildren leaning in conspiratorially, and me pretending to sip tea while absorbing every subtle motion. One light joke escapes me. I should have brought popcorn for this silent movie, I murmur, and Emma giggles softly, trying not to give away our shared secret. As the afternoon stretches on, I feel a sense of anticipation building. I know that these small, seemingly innocuous observations, the tilt of a head, a whispered word, a crumpled scrap of paper, will compound into something larger, a revelation that could redefine the household balance. The quiet loyalty of the grandchildren is no longer invisible. It's a pulse running beneath the overt chaos of adult posturing. People still debate whether such loyalty is purely protective or subtly manipulative, but tonight it feels like a lifeline, a reassurance that truth has allies even in the softest, youngest forms. And as I take a final sip of tea, letting the condensation drip onto my hand, I remind myself that tonight, patience is everything. The story is only beginning, and the next move could come from anywhere, from a whispered word, a misdirected glance, or the tiniest gesture unnoticed by the adults. Remember that subtle tension in the living room? That's just the overture. The symphony of secrets is only starting to play. The next day arrives with an unusual stillness, the kind that makes the house feel heavier than it actually is. I wander into the study, a room lined with tall shelves burdened by dusty books and old family photo albums, and notice a yellowed envelope peeking out from under a stack of ledgers. My hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from curiosity. It's amazing how a single piece of paper can suddenly make the invisible dynamics of a family tangible. People still debate whether these forgotten letters hold real legal weight or simply serve as psychological leverage. But in my experience, they can be a subtle catalyst, a spark in a pile of dry kindling. Inside the envelope is a letter. I don't remember writing, but recognize instantly the scrawl, the loops of my cursive handwriting, the faint scent of lavender I once used to store correspondence. It's addressed to my children, my adult children, outlining a few minor wishes about inheritance, a specific item to go to one grandchild, a small sum earmarked for another, trivial seeming instructions that nevertheless carry the weight of foresight. What fascinates me is how easily such letters can be ignored, lost, or misinterpreted. Mainstream family law often notes that unfiled or informal codicils frequently cause more tension than guidance. Yet here it is, a quiet sentinel in the chaos of our household. I sit on the study chair, letting the letter unfold slowly in my hands, absorbing every word. Outside, the sun's rays fall obliquely through the blinds, casting striped patterns on the floor, mirroring the tension stripes running through the family. There's a faint aroma of coffee from the kitchen, and in that ordinary scent lies a strange comfort, reminders of daily life continuing even as subtle warfare brews behind polite smiles. Fringe customs in some Asian cultures involve leaving letters not for heirs, but for grandchildren directly, almost as secret moral guides. I can't help but feel that, in a sense, this letter has been waiting for the right eyes. A creak interrupts my focus. Emma slips silently into the study, her small frame barely making a sound. She notices the envelope in my hands, her eyes widening just a fraction, a flicker of recognition and understanding. She sits cross-legged on the floor beside me, her presence both reassuring and conspiratorial. I notice Lucas hovering at the door, peeking in, hesitant but attentive. Mainstream studies emphasize that children in these situations develop acute observational skills, learning to read facial expressions and micro-behaviors like seasoned negotiators. People still debate whether this observational acuity is innate or nurtured, but tonight, watching them, I see evidence of both. "Did you know about this?" I whisper, testing her reaction. She shakes her head slightly, but her eyes sparkle with the thrill of discovery. Even at their age, they grasp the significance of the letter, not just its words, but the intent behind it. The nuanced awareness of inheritance dynamics is something most adults overlook until it's too late. I smile softly, thinking about the subtle comedy in this. My adult children, busy posturing, wouldn't notice this letter even if it fell at their feet. I allow myself a light joke. "I guess being stealthy runs in the family." Emma giggles quietly, muffling her laughter into her sleeve as if sound itself could betray our secret. We spend the next half hour examining the letter, discussing minor discrepancies in the listed allocations, and noting how a few items mentioned have already been moved or repurposed by my children. It's fascinating how mundane objects, an old clock, a set of silverware, a painting, suddenly carry enormous symbolic and practical weight in inheritance matters. Fringe inheritance studies point out that families often unconsciously divest the elderly of seemingly trivial items to assert control, a tactic that frequently sows resentment. The grandchildren, however, notice the patterns. They make careful mental notes, subtle observations that will later form a web of accountability. A distant laugh from the kitchen pierces the quiet, reminding me that the adult children are nearby but oblivious. It's a laugh that seems polite on the surface but brittle underneath, like porcelain ready to shatter. I recall that social psychologists have documented how laughter is often used to disguise discomfort or insecurity, particularly in intergenerational disputes. People still debate whether laughter is a protective mechanism or a passive-aggressive weapon, and tonight, in this house, it feels like a bit of both. I glance at Emma and Lucas, both tense yet exhilarated, their loyalty quietly shaping itself into an invisible force. The sunlight shifts, making the room warmer, almost intimate. I can see the faint dust motes rising in the golden beams, turning an ordinary afternoon into something almost cinematic. We begin creating a mental map. Who knows what has been altered, which items might be at risk. There's a thrill in this detective work, subtle and understated but deeply satisfying. Fringe customs in certain Mediterranean cultures involve grandchildren acting as informal witnesses for inheritance wishes, an unusual practice that can enforce fairness without legal confrontation. I smile, realizing that our small alliance mirrors this strange yet effective tradition. A soft knock interrupts the moment. Lucas steps fully into the room, carrying a notebook. "We've been keeping track," he says quietly, flipping it open. The pages contain careful notes on everything, movements, changes, conversations. It's impressive, an almost forensic attention to detail. Mainstream psychology supports the idea that writing observations helps children process complex emotional dynamics, giving them a sense of agency. People still debate whether such meticulous attention is innocent or manipulative, and right now I'm inclined to believe it's a mix of protective strategy and moral duty. We sit in silence for a few minutes, the three of us, a quiet triad absorbing the significance of what we've uncovered. I feel a rare warmth, a reassurance that even in the midst of family tension, truth has allies. Emma nudges me gently, pointing to a line in the letter that contradicts a recent action taken by my adult children. It's a small detail, but the implications are enormous. Minor missteps can unravel the carefully maintained facades of authority. Humor surfaces again softly. I hope they don't find this meeting in a hidden camera reality show, I whisper. A tiny giggle escapes both grandchildren. As the afternoon wanes, the tension outside the study walls contrasts sharply with the calm within. I fold the letter carefully, placing it back in the envelope, but not before making mental notes of its relevance. Every gesture, glance, and subtle interaction tonight reinforces a fundamental truth. Inheritance isn't just about money or possessions. It's about loyalty observation and the quiet courage to notice and act. People still debate whether these skills are ethical or strategic, but tonight, in our little corner of the house, they feel both necessary and just. By evening, the house hums with the low, habitual noise of domestic life, distant clinks from the kitchen, the faint drone of traffic outside, the occasional creak of a floorboard. I walk into the dining room where the table is set for dinner, each plate and utensil placed with a meticulousness that suggests more pride than habit. It's a dinner that should be casual, ordinary, yet the atmosphere feels like walking into a minefield of subtle tensions. People still debate whether routine family meals are simply social rituals or stages for testing alliances, and tonight I feel it's very much both. The adults gather voices polite, but tight, small smiles masking the strain in their shoulders. My children, who usually exude confidence, now seem conscious of invisible eyes upon them. The same eyes that have already witnessed minor deceptions, tiny shifts in the inheritance plan. Mainstream studies note that passive-aggressive behaviors often surface in such environments, masked by politeness where indirect confrontations replace outright disputes. I watch sipping my tea slowly and notice how even the placement of a chair or a shift of the napkin can carry meaning. Emma and Lucas sit at the end of the table, their posture subtly reinforcing their silent alliance with me. They exchange small, imperceptible signals, raising an eyebrow, tapping fingers once or twice that convey a language only we understand. Fringe customs in some Scandinavian countries suggest that grandchildren act as silent observers in household disputes, noting discrepancies and reporting back to elders. I can't help but think our trio has adopted a modern, less formal version of this practice, silently cataloging behaviors that could prove pivotal later. Conversation begins polite inquiries about work, school, and the neighborhood, but underneath every phrase is a layer of testing and measurement. My children reference bills and minor transactions, probing my memory, seeking cues, trying to assess how aware I am of recent changes. People still debate whether such probing is parental concern or covert manipulation, and the line often blurs. The real amusement comes in noticing the incongruence, the way their words suggest authority, while their body language betrays uncertainty. I note the small ways they assert control, adjusting a centerpiece, moving utensils, commenting on menu choices, almost as if each minor gesture could anchor their dominance. Research in family dynamics points out that these seemingly trivial behaviors, micro-adjustments in routine, serve as signals of power and control. Fringe legal sources even suggest that adults will sometimes subtly redirect assets or household items to test awareness and influence a silent contest that often goes unnoticed. A conversation erupts over dessert, trivial in subject, but loaded in intent. My eldest makes a passing remark about a painting in the living room, insinuating it should perhaps be reconsidered in terms of placement or ownership. Lucas leans slightly forward, whispering softly to Emma, who barely moves her lips in response. I watch this small choreography unfold, noting how subtly the grandchildren challenge assertions without overt confrontation. Humor sneaks in. I imagine a headline, "Children quietly outmaneuver parents with whispered cues," and chuckle under my breath. I shift in my chair and comment casually on the painting, noting its sentimental value, a light joke about how it's the one thing no one can sell without a scandal. Emma snickers softly while Lucas allows himself a tiny grin. The adults focused on maintaining authority seem not to notice the minor rebellion playing out under their noses. Mainstream research emphasizes that children and grandchildren often pick up on adult overconfidence, using it as leverage to observe and intervene subtly. People still debate whether this constitutes manipulation or merely strategic awareness, but in our home, tonight, it's survival. Midway through the meal, I notice an oddly specific pattern in my children's conversation. They frequently return to minor financial topics, almost as if rehearsing dominance. I reflect on fringe customs from certain Mediterranean regions where elders deliberately plant small errors or ambiguities in discussions to test attentiveness and moral compass. My children's obliviousness to the fact that Emma and Lucas are picking up on these errors is both alarming and, in a strange way, delightful. I whisper a small joke. Maybe they think we're still in kindergarten. The grandchildren stifle laughter, their eyes sparkling with quiet complicity. The tension crescendos when my middle child subtly changes the subject to a minor inheritance detail, a jewelry box that has been in the family for generations. Their tone is casual, but there's an underlying test to probe to see if I notice the discrepancy in what was previously agreed upon. Fringe inheritance rituals note that even small objects like a jewelry box can be symbolic anchors in disputes, almost talismanic in their importance. I watch Emma and Lucas exchange a slight nod and acknowledgement of the subtle deceit, and I feel a swell of gratitude for their awareness and loyalty. By the time dinner winds down, the table is strewn with evidence of consumption crumbs, a half-empty dessert plate, coffee cups with lingering aroma. I feel the shift in atmosphere as subtly as a tide turning. The undercurrent of scrutiny, observation, and silent alliance has reached a new depth. I reflect on the absurdity and the drama at once, how ordinary routines, like family dinners, serve as both theater and battlefield. People still debate whether families inherently cultivate this tension, or if it emerges only under specific circumstances like inheritance disputes. Tonight, I realize it emerges both naturally and intentionally. The grandchildren linger after the adults leave the table, Emma pointing out a subtle inconsistency in my middle child's recounting of expenses. Lucas scribbles notes their whispered conversation punctuated by small smiles and quiet laughter. I sit back savoring the quiet victory of observation and awareness, feeling a strange mixture of amusement, pride, and reassurance. The ordinary setting, dinner plates, chairs, has transformed into a stage for subtle acts of loyalty and strategic awareness. As I watch them, I understand that in the grand dance of family conflict, the quietest steps often leave the most lasting impressions. The next morning, sunlight filters softly through the curtains, painting the living room in gentle stripes of gold and shadow. I find myself wandering toward the home office, a room that always smells faintly of aged paper and polished wood. Something about the stillness today makes the air feel heavier, as though it's charged with anticipation. I notice the edge of a notebook sticking out from beneath a pile of mail on the desk, the same desk my adult children often hover around pretending to handle bills, but really monitoring household movements. People still debate whether the appearance of routine work masks manipulation or just habit, and today I lean toward the former. Emma is already seated cross-legged on the floor, her notebook open, pencil poised. Lucas leans against the doorway, pretending to read a book, while clearly observing every shift in my movements. They exchange subtle nods, signaling their quiet alliance, a language formed entirely of glances and tiny gestures. Mainstream psychology suggests that children who act as observers in family disputes often develop advanced social intuition, early understanding both the explicit and implicit rules of engagement. Fringe research in inheritance law notes that unreported bank accounts, sometimes tucked away in obscure branches or under different names, are frequent tools in parental maneuvering. Tonight, we might be unearthing one of those hidden threads. I pick up the notebook from the desk, scanning the entries my grandchildren have recorded. Dates, minor transactions, small objects relocated without explanation. They've documented everything meticulously, almost like junior forensic analysts. It's impressive and a little humorous to see how seriously they've approached this task. I can't resist a quiet joke. At this rate, you two might qualify as legal consultants by age 12. Emma smiles, hiding her teeth behind her hand, and Lucas rolls his eyes subtly, the smallest show of camaraderie. A soft tap at the window draws my attention outside. A neighbor's cat stretches lazily on the porch, utterly indifferent to the human dramas unfolding indoors. It's funny how these ordinary details can provide a brief mental escape even in the middle of a subtle familial war. Mainstream family studies note that minor sensory experiences like sights, smells, or small interactions can anchor individuals in reality, helping them process tension without overreacting. People still debate whether these anchoring moments serve as coping mechanisms or distractions, but right now, I feel both. I turn my attention back to the notebook, noticing a pattern. Certain objects, small sums of money, and minor family heirlooms have been quietly redirected by my adult children over the past months. The changes are subtle, almost imperceptible unless documented. Fringe cultural studies indicate that in some families, reassigning minor possessions is a method to assert authority and gauge reactions. I realize that the grandchildren's awareness of these changes is not just vigilance, it's a protective act ensuring that the family's legacy remains intact. Emma points to a scribbled note in the corner of the page, a transaction dated last week involving a small safe tucked behind the bookcase in the study. Lucas whispers a possible explanation, suggesting that the safe may contain additional unrecorded assets. I feel a thrill of recognition. The strategy is unfolding quietly, methodically. I smile inwardly, thinking about how ordinary rooms, bookcases, side tables, even flower pots can become secret repositories, carrying potential revelations hidden in plain sight. Mainstream inheritance research suggests that the most overlooked spaces often contain the items most contested, simply because adults assume no one will think to look there. As we talk in hushed tones, I notice the deliberate pacing in my grandchildren's movements. They're careful, not just observant, aware that even a minor slip could alert the adults or compromise our understanding of the household's secrets. There's a beauty in this precision, a calm intelligence in their loyalty. Fringe studies of intergenerational observation note that children who act in protective roles often mimic adult strategic behavior consciously or unconsciously, adopting negotiation techniques from those they trust. People still debate whether imitation or instinct governs these early alliances, and tonight I see evidence of both. Suddenly, Lucas leans forward, pointing to a line in the notebook where an item supposedly given to a cousin has disappeared entirely from our records. It's small, a silver trinket, but its absence is emblematic, a symptom of the deeper maneuvering at play. We exchange a glance, a silent understanding that this isn't random. It's a clue. Humor breaks the tension for a moment. I knew that trinket had a sense of adventure, I murmur, and both children suppress giggles, the tiniest rebellion against the weight of adult pretense. I rise to pace the room, letting my fingers trail along the edge of the desk. The sunlight now falls warmer, a soft glow that tempers the tension. I reflect on how ordinary routines, tea preparation, sweeping, even adjusting curtains, can mask subtle power plays, turning daily life into a theater of strategy. Mainstream sociology suggests that family hierarchies often express themselves most clearly in mundane tasks, where authority is asserted subtly rather than overtly. Fringe inheritance customs echo this principle, using seemingly trivial actions to test attentiveness and obedience. Tonight in our study, these lessons are vividly alive. By mid-afternoon, the children have begun to categorize and prioritize information, creating a mental map of assets, behaviors, and possible oversights. Emma marks lines in her notebook with a careful hand while Lucas whispers corrections and adjustments. I sit back, feeling a rare combination of pride and anticipation. There's humor in this meticulousness, yet also profound satisfaction. People still debate whether grandchildren should be participants in inheritance oversight or simply observers. And here they are, clearly a hybrid, students of strategy, guardians of legacy, and silent allies. As the sun begins to tilt lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the floor, I realize that this quiet afternoon of observation has laid the groundwork for significant revelations. The family's ordinary space, the study, the notebooks, the overlooked corners, has transformed into a theater of accountability and subtle justice. Fringe inheritance law might call it preventive oversight. Mainstream research might label it intergenerational mediation. But whatever the label, the effect is tangible. Emma and Lucas, through their loyalty and attentiveness, have already begun to tip the balance, ensuring that truth and fairness might yet prevail in the household. Late afternoon settles like a soft blanket over the house, golden light spilling through the windows and warming the furniture. I move back into the living room, the quiet punctuated only by the faint tick of the mantel clock. Emma and Lucas are already there, seated with their notebooks, whispering softly, exchanging subtle gestures and tiny glances that feel like signals in a secret language. It's remarkable how much children can convey without a single word. Mainstream family psychology notes that grandchildren often act as emotional barometers, sensing tension and aligning loyalties instinctively. People still debate whether this loyalty is purely protective or strategic, but tonight it's clear that both forces are at play. I settle into my favorite armchair, sipping a cup of chamomile tea, and watch as the grandchildren point out minor inconsistencies they've noticed over the past days. Small amounts of money missing objects relocated, the subtle overemphasis of certain details by my adult children, all cataloged meticulously. Fringe inheritance research highlights that these micro-patterns, though they seem trivial, often reveal intentions far beyond their surface. One tiny silver locket moved without explanation suddenly carries weight as both symbol and evidence. I smile, quietly impressed by the clarity and patience of these young observers. Emma leans forward, her elbows on her knees, whispering, "I think they're testing us." Lucas nods, flipping a page in his notebook with deliberate care. There's a rhythm to their actions, a silent orchestration of observation and deduction. Mainstream sociology emphasizes that children often learn strategic patience in high-stakes family dynamics, adapting quickly to reading subtle social cues. Fringe customs in some cultures even instruct grandchildren to monitor elder directives, ensuring that intentions are respected. In our house, these skills are unfolding naturally, quietly, almost invisibly. I can't resist a small joke. Should we start charging them for consultancy? Both children giggle softly, the sound almost masked by the hush of the room. Their quiet amusement is a small relief amid the tension, a reminder that even in serious matters, levity matters. It's astonishing how these ordinary moments, a shared glance, a whispered note, a suppressed laugh, can serve as anchors in a sea of subtle familial maneuvering. People still debate whether such humor strengthens alliances or undermines authority. Tonight, it clearly strengthens ours. We turn our attention to the ledger left carelessly open on the coffee table, evidence of yet another subtle shift in household resources. Entries have been altered, small sums transferred, a few minor items reassigned. Mainstream research notes that such adjustments, often overlooked by adults, can have outsized symbolic and practical implications in family hierarchies. Fringe legal advice warns that minor undocumented reallocations frequently ignite disputes later, but our grandchildren's awareness serves as a protective buffer, quietly safeguarding the narrative. I let a light chuckle escape. I feel like I'm in a spy movie, I murmur, watching as they lean in, pointing at numbers, whispering conclusions. Their attention to detail is extraordinary, and the strategy is evident. Observe, record, corroborate. Mainstream family dynamics studies suggest that grandchildren who participate in such covert observation develop heightened analytical and ethical reasoning skills. People still debate whether such early exposure to conflict is beneficial or stressful, and I admit it's a delicate balance. But the children's focus tonight reassures me. The room grows warmer as sunlight drifts through the window, dust motes swirling lazily in its beams. Each object, the chair, the rug, the notebooks, takes on new significance as potential evidence, as silent witnesses to decisions made without consent. Fringe inheritance rituals from certain regions involve embedding clues within daily routines, ensuring observant youth can detect discrepancies. In our home, these children are effectively acting as guardians of both memory and morality. Their loyalty is quiet, almost invisible, but it carries power. Lucas scribbles a note about a minor discrepancy regarding a jewelry box that had been reassigned without explanation. Emma leans closer, pointing out that its new location doesn't match the instructions in the letter we uncovered earlier. I can feel a thrill of anticipation. These small discoveries are pieces of a larger puzzle. Mainstream psychologists highlight that noticing such incongruities builds critical thinking and problem-solving skills. People still debate whether empowering children in these scenarios encourages responsibility or undue pressure, but tonight it seems like a careful, guided awareness. We pause for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing outside. The ordinary sounds underscore the tension, in contrast, a reminder that these acts of observation are happening within the fabric of daily life. A soft joke escapes me. At this rate, we might need a courtroom just for tea time. Emma snickers quietly while Lucas rolls his eyes in mock exasperation, the perfect small comic relief. It's strange how levity can coexist with strategy, turning moments of potential stress into shared understanding. As the sun tilts lower, casting elongated shadows across the room, I reflect on the power of quiet loyalty. The children's attention, observation, and subtle guidance have begun to form a network of accountability and insight, a quiet counterbalance to the adult's overt authority. Fringe studies suggest that these hidden alliances often become pivotal in unraveling disputes, protecting the vulnerable, and restoring fairness. People still debate whether grandchildren should intervene in family dynamics or remain passive observers. But tonight, their presence is not only protective, it is transformative. The story is unfolding, and the quiet acts of rebellion, insight, and loyalty are weaving a tapestry that will shape the narrative to come. Twilight creeps in, softening the edges of the room and lending everything a golden haze. I move back toward the study where the day's observations have accumulated into a subtle web of knowledge. The air smells faintly of old paper and lingering tea, a combination that strangely grounds me as tension begins to build. My grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, are already there, their posture alert but calm, a testament to how much patience and discipline they've developed. Mainstream family research notes that children who actively monitor adult interactions in disputes often demonstrate early development of executive functioning skills, such as planning and foresight. People still debate whether these skills emerge naturally or through circumstance, and tonight I see evidence of both. I notice the ledger lying open on the desk, revealing another minor anomaly, a transfer that doesn't correspond to the notes in the letter we uncovered earlier. It's a small sum, almost trivial, yet the symbolic weight is enormous. Fringe inheritance customs from parts of Southern Europe include testing heirs with minor financial shifts to gauge attentiveness and moral responsibility. I feel a small thrill. The discrepancy, while subtle, is the kind of clue that reveals intentions. Emma leans in, whispering a calculation, her pencil scratching quietly across the page. Lucas points out an overlooked entry from a week prior, and together they begin piecing the puzzle. I sit back in the chair, sipping my tea and observing the almost imperceptible choreography. Their movements, gestures, and exchanges of glances form a rhythm, a silent strategy session executed with precision. Mainstream psychology notes that children in such roles develop advanced pattern recognition and analytical reasoning skills, often surpassing adults in subtlety and comprehension. Fringe legal studies highlight that minor oversights in financial records or the misplacement of assets often unravel when younger family members are vigilant. People still debate whether such surveillance constitutes interference or protection, but in this house, it feels very much like both. I make a light joke to break the growing tension. Do you think they'll award us medals for detective work at the next family reunion? Emma snickers quietly, covering her mouth, and Lucas lets out a soft chuckle. Humor, even in small doses, provides a buffer against the intensity of observation and strategy. The small laugh creates an almost cinematic moment, a brief respite, a flicker of humanity amid the unfolding, subtle warfare. Our attention shifts to the small safe tucked behind the bookcase, an object previously overlooked by the adults. The ledger indicates minor deposits and removals that don't match the official accounts. It's astonishing how such minor manipulations can signal larger intentions. Fringe customs suggest that family safes, particularly those unnoticed or unmarked, often contain items meant to test attentiveness or ethical judgment. Emma and Lucas exchange a glance, silent but potent. They are already thinking several steps ahead, preparing for eventualities the adults haven't even considered. I lean closer, noticing a slight tremor of excitement in Emma's hands as she points to a specific line in the ledger. "Look," she whispers, "this doesn't match the letter's instructions." Lucas nods, scribbling quick notes. The thrill in their careful, deliberate actions is palpable. Mainstream studies show that children actively engaged in observation often experience a sense of empowerment, understanding that their knowledge contributes to fairness and accountability. People still debate whether this early engagement fosters responsibility or stress, but tonight it seems to cultivate both wisdom and loyalty. The room is warm with sunlight fading into dusk shadows lengthening across the walls. The ordinary sounds, the ticking clock, distant traffic, faint hum of the refrigerator provide a grounding counterpoint to the tension. Each object, each note, each glimmering clue carries significance far beyond its apparent value. Fringe inheritance research emphasizes that subtle oversight, particularly by attentive grandchildren, can prevent misappropriation and protect legacy even when adults are unaware of the full picture. The dynamic in this room feels like a quiet triumph of foresight and vigilance. I let out a soft laugh, appreciating the scene, children acting as silent guardians, balancing observation with strategy, humor with seriousness. Mainstream sociology notes that intergenerational alliances can subtly shift household power structures, often correcting inequities without confrontation. People still debate whether these alliances undermine authority or preserve moral balance, and I see evidence of both tonight. My grandchildren are becoming stewards of fairness in a world where casual neglect or intent can obscure truth. As the light wanes, I reflect on how ordinary routines, the shuffle of papers, the flick of a pencil, the sipping of tea can transform into acts of subtle power and influence. Emma and Lucas, with quiet loyalty and meticulous attention, are orchestrating a protective strategy that is invisible to the adults, but transformative in effect. Fringe inheritance practices might call it preventive vigilance. Mainstream research might call it intergenerational accountability. But tonight, it's simply the embodiment of care, insight, and foresight. The day draws to a close, and yet the implications of these quiet observations linger, promising a shift in the household balance. The soft hum of evening, combined with the diligent work of the grandchildren, has created a layer of protection and awareness that will soon have profound consequences. People still debate whether such involvement is necessary or overstepping, but tonight it feels essential, almost sacred, a quiet assertion that loyalty, observation, and attentiveness can alter the course of family dynamics in meaningful ways. The night deepens, and the house settles into a quiet rhythm, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant hum of a passing car. I linger in the living room, watching Emma and Lucas, their notebooks, open pencils moving in silent cadence. There's a palpable focus in their eyes, a seriousness that makes me proud and a little awed. Mainstream family research highlights that children engaged in active observation develop advanced emotional intelligence and foresight, often anticipating adult actions before they occur. People still debate whether such abilities are innate or nurtured, but tonight the evidence seems indisputable. A small revelation emerges when Emma points to a line in the ledger that contradicts a recent discussion my middle child had casually mentioned. Lucas whispers a clarification, cross-referencing previous notes. The discrepancy is minor, a small transfer of money, a subtle reassignment of a household item, but its implications are enormous. Fringe inheritance studies suggest that such subtle misalignments, though easily overlooked by adults, often reveal deeper intentions or manipulations. I feel a thrill of recognition knowing that we are peeling back layers of pretense with quiet observation rather than confrontation. I lean back in the armchair, letting the faint warmth of the lamplight wash over me and make a small joke to ease the tension. At this rate, we could start our own detective agency. Emma stifles a giggle into her sleeve, and Lucas allows a small grin. Humor becomes a tool, a momentary release in the middle of the calculated tension. The children's loyalty is evident not just in their attention to detail, but in their subtle encouragement, their mutual reinforcement of patience and discretion. Mainstream psychology notes that humor, when integrated into strategic observation, strengthens social bonds and reduces stress. The conversation shifts quietly to a minor object, a silver bracelet that had been placed in a different drawer than the one indicated in the letter we uncovered. It's a small detail, but in our context, it represents more than a mere trinket. Fringe cultural practices in inheritance suggest that small personal items often act as symbolic markers of intention and attention tests of fidelity and awareness. Emma and Lucas exchange a glance, silently acknowledging that this bracelet may become central in understanding recent adult behavior. People still debate whether such symbolic significance is culturally constructed or universal, and tonight it matters deeply in our household. I notice the subtle choreography between the children. They're careful not to speak above a whisper, their pencils scratching softly, their heads tilting in unison to signal discovery or understanding. Mainstream studies suggest that children in high-stakes observational roles develop refined nonverbal communication, often surpassing adults in subtlety. Fringe inheritance literature notes that covert observation, if practiced attentively, can reveal manipulation before it escalates. I watch, realizing that our quiet alliance has begun to function as an invisible safeguard, a counterbalance to adult authority. Lucas points to a minor discrepancy in the account ledger, an entry from 2 weeks ago that doesn't match receipts elsewhere. Emma whispers a hypothesis, connecting it to a previously noted minor misdirection by the adults. Their analytical process is systematic and deliberate, combining memory, observation, and reasoning in a way that feels almost surgical. Mainstream research emphasizes that such skills, when developed in a safe and guided context, contribute to long-term critical thinking. People still debate whether early exposure to family conflict is beneficial, but here it appears to sharpen the grandchildren's acuity without harming their sense of security. I reach for my tea, the warmth of the cup grounding me as I observe their meticulous work. The ordinary room, the sofa, the rug, the lamp has transformed into a theater of strategy and subtle influence. Fringe customs in some cultures prescribe that attentive grandchildren act as moral and observational guides, a role that bridges generational understanding. In our household, the children have assumed that role naturally, with patience, discretion, and an almost reverent sense of duty. A faint noise from the hallway reminds us that the adults are still nearby, carrying on with what they perceive as normal routines. The irony is subtle, but delicious. The very adults attempting to assert control are oblivious to the quiet intelligence operating just a few feet away. Humor slips again. If only they knew a toddler could have outmaneuvered them tonight, I murmur, and the children allow a restrained smile, appreciating the levity without breaking focus. We pause to consider the implications of what we've uncovered so far. Minor discrepancies, hidden movements, subtle reallocations. Each represents a thread in the larger tapestry of family strategy. Fringe inheritance research suggests that these threads, when observed and recorded, can unearth the full intent of those trying to manipulate outcomes. Mainstream family dynamics note that grandchildren often act as moral compasses and guardians capable of influencing fairness indirectly. People still debate whether such influence is ethically appropriate, but tonight it's undeniably protective. As the evening deepens, the quiet alliance between myself and the grandchildren solidifies. Each observation, each whispered note, each small strategic act reinforces a pattern of loyalty and foresight. The ordinary household, the study, the notebooks, the ledger entries, has become a stage for subtle, transformative action. And in the shadows of routine domestic life, the first cracks in the adult's carefully constructed authority begin to show hints of revelation that will ripple through the family in the nights and days to come. Night deepens and the house drifts into a silence that feels heavier than usual. Even the faint hum of the refrigerator seems subdued, as if the air itself senses the unfolding quiet rebellion. I walk through the living room toward the study, careful to tread softly on the wooden floorboards that always creak under the slightest weight. Emma and Lucas are already positioned strategically near the desk, their notebooks open, eyes alert, fingers poised to record every subtle movement or overheard word. There's a rhythm to their actions, a flow that has developed over days of observation, and it almost feels like a dance, subtle, coordinated, deliberate. Mainstream studies on intergenerational observation suggest that children who actively engage in such scrutiny develop early strategic thinking, empathy, and social acuity. People still debate whether this heightened awareness imposes undue pressure or fosters resilience, but in our quiet corner of the house, it feels like the latter. I sit in my chair, letting my gaze linger on the ledger lying open on the desk. The entries, minor transactions, movements of household items, and subtle shifts in account balances tell a story that adults in the house either ignore or pretend not to notice. Fringe inheritance research emphasizes that overlooked microtransactions often carry symbolic and practical significance, sometimes revealing intentions far beyond what is apparent. Tonight, it feels as though the ledger itself has become a secret map, a roadmap of intentions, and my grandchildren have become the silent cartographers. Emma leans forward, whispering to Lucas about a particular entry that doesn't align with a note in the letter we found earlier. Her eyes flick briefly to mine, a signal that she recognizes the gravity of the discrepancy. Lucas nods subtly, pointing to an annotation he made in the margin, connecting it to a minor object moved by one of the adults. The meticulousness of their reasoning is astonishing. They're not just observing, they're interpreting, correlating, predicting. Mainstream psychology notes that children engaged in problem-solving within complex social environments often develop advanced cognitive flexibility, understanding multiple perspectives simultaneously. People still debate whether such skills develop naturally or through necessity. But tonight, it's clear that our little team has honed them to precision. I sip my tea slowly, letting the warmth seep into my hands as I listen to the faint scratching of pencils on paper. Each small sound punctuates the room with purpose. Fringe inheritance customs from various cultures prescribe that attentive grandchildren monitor the implementation of parental directives, ensuring that intentions are not subverted. In a way, Emma and Lucas have assumed this traditional role, though, without ceremony or formal instruction. Their loyalty is quiet, but formidable, and I feel a swell of pride tempered by anticipation. There is more to uncover, more subtle maneuvers to discern. A distant laugh from the hallway reminds us that the adults are still circulating in the house, their voices polite but strained, layered with the pretense of authority. They believe they control the narrative, yet in our study, the quiet power balance is shifting, unnoticed but palpable. Humor slips into the tension for a moment. At this rate, we might need a courtroom just for tea time, I murmur softly. Emma snickers, trying to suppress her laugh, while Lucas allows himself a small grin, the brief levity reminding us that even strategy requires moments of human relief. Turning our attention back to the ledger, the children note subtle anomalies. Minor amounts of cash moved without proper documentation, small objects reassigned with vague explanations, and discrepancies in how instructions from the letter have been executed. Each discovery is cataloged with care, analyzed in light of prior observations, and stored mentally for later comparison. Fringe legal studies highlight that such details, often dismissed as trivial, frequently reveal the underlying intentions of those attempting to manipulate inheritance outcomes. Mainstream family psychology similarly notes that observing and recording these micropatterns helps develop foresight, attention to ethical nuances, and resilience in high-stakes social environments. People still debate whether this early involvement is appropriate, but the necessity is clear. These observations act as a protective measure against hidden agendas. I pause, letting the moment stretch as I reflect on how ordinary domestic spaces, the desk, the notebooks, the desk lamp casting soft shadows have transformed into a theater of subtle power and accountability. Emma whispers a discovery about a missing silver charm, an object that had been quietly reassigned to a drawer in the bedroom. Lucas cross-references previous notes confirming the movement, and together they develop a hypothesis. The charm may represent a minor trial, a test of attentiveness, or perhaps a subtle assertion of control by my adult children. Fringe inheritance rituals often embed such symbolic trials in daily life, ensuring that only those attentive to details can maintain fidelity to the family's intended plan. Mainstream research supports this observation. Minor oversights often provide the clearest evidence of manipulation. The children lean closer together, their heads almost touching, exchanging insights without words. Their coordination is remarkable, a dance of cognition and intuition. Mainstream family studies suggest that children who engage in these subtle cooperative efforts often develop sophisticated executive functioning skills, learning to anticipate consequences, track multiple threads of information, and maintain ethical consistency. People still debate whether such exposure to family tension is beneficial or stressful, but tonight it seems both stimulating and purposeful. A soft knock at the door interrupts our concentration. Lucas pauses, then whispers that it's probably one of the adults checking on routine matters. We remain silent, letting the moment pass, our quiet patience itself a strategy. Fringe research on covert observation emphasizes that restraint, the ability to observe without interjecting, is often more revealing than any direct intervention. Mainstream psychologists note that the capacity to wait to resist immediate reaction is a crucial skill in conflict resolution and strategic thinking. People still debate whether this skill is learned or innate, but here it is being exercised with deliberate care. As the night deepens, our attention turns to the safe behind the bookcase, an object that had previously seemed insignificant but now presents a potential treasure trove of clues. The ledger hints at minor deposits and withdrawals that don't align with the formal records, small yet telling discrepancies. Emma and Lucas begin mapping these anomalies against known behaviors, hypothesizing why certain objects or amounts were moved. Their analytical process, executed with subtle gestures, whispered cues, and precise notation, is nothing short of extraordinary. Mainstream family dynamics research emphasizes that such predictive observation helps children anticipate and mitigate potential injustice. Fringe inheritance law supports the idea that these small acts of vigilance can preserve fairness without direct confrontation. I take a deep breath, appreciating the gravity of our endeavor. The room, once ordinary, has become charged with quiet strategy, subtle moral evaluation, and growing awareness. Emma points out a tiny error in the recording of a minor heirloom, a detail that seems insignificant but may prove pivotal. Lucas cross-references this with prior observations, and together they begin formulating a plan for careful disclosure or gentle correction. Humor bubbles up again. We're practically running a family audit at this hour, I whisper. A small chuckle passes between the three of us, a shared acknowledgement of the extraordinary nature of our quiet work. The house grows colder as the night deepens, the warm lamplight softening shadows across the walls. Our observations have begun to coalesce into a narrative of accountability, loyalty, and subtle challenge to the adult's authority. Mainstream sociology notes that intergenerational alliances, when executed with discretion and care, can restore balance and prevent misappropriation or manipulation. Fringe cultural practices highlight that attentive grandchildren often serve as informal guardians of fairness, preserving the integrity of inheritance and family legacy. People still debate whether such involvement is intrusive, but here it feels like justice executed with patience and wisdom. By the time the clock ticks toward late evening, our notebooks are full, hypotheses, formulated minor discoveries cataloged. Emma and Lucas exchange a subtle nod, a signal of completion for this session of quiet vigilance. I lean back, savoring the faint aroma of chamomile and the soft rustle of papers, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The ordinary living room, the quiet study, the modest ledger they have become, instruments in an unfolding symphony of insight and loyalty. Fringe inheritance scholars might call this preventive oversight. Mainstream psychologists would recognize the cultivation of ethical reasoning and strategic thinking, and we simply call it watching, learning, and protecting what matters. The day ends with the reassurance that even in silence, loyalty and awareness can alter outcomes. Small discoveries, minor reconciliations, and quiet strategies have begun to shape the narrative, tilting the balance toward fairness and clarity. People still debate the ethics of early involvement in family dynamics, but tonight I know that careful observation, discretion, and thoughtful engagement have created a protective shield, one that will resonate far beyond the confines of the living room or study. Our alliance, subtle and deliberate, has begun to change the story one quiet, insightful step at a time. The following morning arrives with a peculiar stillness, almost as if the house itself is bracing for revelations to come. Sunlight pierces through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor, the walls, and the furniture in warm bands of gold and shadow. I move carefully into the study, aware of the tension that has become a constant presence. Emma and Lucas are already there, sitting cross-legged near the desk, their notebooks open. Eyes, sharp pencils poised. Their quiet attentiveness has transformed them into observers, analysts, and silent strategists. Mainstream research in family dynamics notes that grandchildren engaged in such observation often develop heightened social perception and critical thinking skills. People still debate whether early exposure to these dynamics is ethically sound, but in this house, it feels necessary and protective. I sit at my chair, letting my gaze fall on the ledger and scattered notes across the desk. Minor discrepancies, relocated objects, and unrecorded movements have become more than mere anomalies. They're clues, threads in a tapestry of subtle maneuvering by the adults. Fringe inheritance studies suggest that these small misalignments often foreshadow larger acts of manipulation or oversight, acting as early indicators of intention. Emma leans toward Lucas, whispering a connection between a missing silver bracelet and a recent discussion about asset redistribution. Lucas nods, noting the linkage in his margin. Their teamwork is a delicate balance of observation, interpretation, and calculation executed with precision. I sip my tea slowly, the warmth grounding me as I observe their meticulous analysis. There's a sense of anticipation, a quiet thrill that comes from understanding that the family's narrative is not solely in the hands of the adults. Mainstream psychology highlights that children engaged in such monitoring develop problem-solving skills and moral discernment at an accelerated pace. People still debate whether this involvement constitutes undue pressure or beneficial engagement, but tonight it seems to sharpen insight, instill vigilance, and cultivate ethical awareness. A soft creak from the hallway reminds us that the adults are nearby, conducting their routines under the illusion of authority. Their obliviousness is almost comical, the tension between perceived and actual control palpable. I lean back, murmuring a small joke. They have no idea we're writing their playbook in real time. Emma and Lucas exchange a suppressed chuckle, a small burst of shared amusement amid the gravity of their task. Humor, even subtle, seems to cement the alliance, creating a buffer against the weight of strategy and observation. The focus returns to the ledger. A minor discrepancy in a recent transaction jumps out, a small sum that appears to have been redirected or misrecorded. Fringe inheritance literature notes that minor deviations, often overlooked, are rich in information revealing priorities, misdirection, or potential oversight. The children note it meticulously, comparing the entry to prior records and the letter we uncovered earlier. Their reasoning is deliberate, layered, and insightful. Mainstream family sociology suggests that children acting as observers often develop advanced foresight, noticing patterns invisible to adults. People still debate whether such early responsibility is beneficial, but in this household, it feels like a necessary shield. I glance around the study, taking in the ordinary surroundings now transformed into a theater of observation. The desk, the notebooks, the faint lamplight all become instruments in our quiet strategy. Emma points out a minor anomaly concerning a family heirloom, a silver locket relocated without explanation. Lucas cross-references it with prior notes, confirming the shift and hypothesizing possible intent. The children's precision is remarkable, a combination of memory analysis and ethical reasoning executed with subtlety and care. Mainstream family research notes that such cognitive exercises cultivate maturity, patience, and judgment. People still debate whether these skills come too early, but their confidence and attention suggest a natural aptitude refined through circumstance. I lean forward, whispering a question to Emma. "Do you think they expect us to notice this?" She shakes her head subtly, a small smile breaking across her face, acknowledging both the secrecy and the fun in uncovering adult mistakes. Lucas whispers a theory connecting several discrepancies, pointing to what may be a deliberate attempt to obscure intentions. Fringe cultural practices in some regions assign grandchildren the role of silent moral guardians, ensuring that inheritance intentions are honored. In our household, the children have assumed this role intuitively, creating a protective buffer through observation and documentation. The atmosphere is thick with focus and subtle energy. Each pencil scratch, whispered note, and shared glance carries significance. Mainstream psychology suggests that children in such high-stakes observation scenarios develop heightened situational awareness, ethical reasoning, and a sense of agency. People still debate whether early involvement in family oversight fosters stress or empowerment. Here it clearly cultivates both awareness and purpose. Humor resurfaces in small ways, I murmur. Soon we'll need magnifying glasses and lab coats for all this detective work. Emma suppresses a laugh. Lucas smirks, and we continue our careful cataloging. As afternoon drifts toward evening, attention turns to the safe behind the bookcase, a small yet potentially pivotal site of hidden activity. Ledger entries hint at minor deposits and withdrawals that don't align with documented instructions. Emma and Lucas begin mapping these anomalies, connecting movements and transactions across time. The sophistication of their observation is astonishing, anticipating adult behavior, predicting potential outcomes, and planning subtle interventions without confrontation. Fringe inheritance research emphasizes that such proactive oversight by attentive youth can prevent misappropriation and safeguard family legacy. Mainstream studies suggest that children in these roles often develop problem-solving, pattern recognition, and moral discernment skills far earlier than their peers. People still debate whether such vigilance is ethical or necessary, but here it feels both. A soft knock at the study door interrupts our focus. Lucas freezes momentarily before whispering, "Probably just one of the adults." We remain silent, our presence a quiet strategy, allowing the moment to pass without revealing the depth of our observations. Mainstream social psychology highlights the value of restraint and observation. Patience often yields more insight than direct intervention. Fringe inheritance protocols echo this principle, recommending that careful monitoring be conducted quietly, preserving discretion and integrity. I watch the children, marveling at their patience, their understanding, their growing sense of purpose. By nightfall, the notebooks are filled with meticulous observations, hypotheses, and tentative conclusions. Minor anomalies, hidden patterns, and subtle acts of misdirection have been cataloged and analyzed. Emma and Lucas exchange a subtle nod, signaling that today's work is complete. I lean back in my chair, the warm glow of the lamp softening the edges of the room and our tension. The ordinary study, once a neutral space, has become a hub of strategy, loyalty, and quiet moral oversight. Mainstream sociology recognizes the value of intergenerational alliances in preserving fairness, while fringe studies underscore the protective power of attentive observation. People still debate the ethics and appropriateness of early involvement in family dynamics, but tonight it has created clarity, accountability, and foresight. The quiet hum of the house, the faint aroma of tea and paper, and the soft rustle of pages create a backdrop for reflection. Our careful observations have begun to create a narrative of accountability, loyalty, and subtle challenge to authority. Each minor discovery, each careful record, is a thread weaving toward the eventual revelation, tilting the balance of awareness in our favor. The children, through their patience, intelligence, and loyalty, have begun to change the story, not with confrontation, but with insight. Fringe inheritance practices might label this preventive vigilance. Mainstream psychology might recognize the development of moral and strategic reasoning. In our living room, it simply feels like justice, unfolding quietly, deliberately, and profoundly. Night has fully fallen, and the house rests under the soft glow of table lamps and the occasional streetlight filtering through the blinds. There is a stillness in the air, a sense that the day's careful observations are now settling into a quiet rhythm, ready to produce consequences. I move into the living room where Emma and Lucas sit side by side, their notebooks, open pencils poised for one last review before we take a pause. Their expressions are concentrated yet calm, a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. Mainstream family psychology highlights that children actively engaged in observation develop not only advanced reasoning skills, but also ethical awareness. People still debate whether such involvement is formative or burdensome, but tonight it is clearly shaping both responsibility and insight. I settle into my armchair, allowing myself a small moment of reflection. The events of the past days, the subtle observations, the cataloging of discrepancies, the careful note-taking have begun to form a larger narrative of loyalty and truth. Fringe inheritance studies emphasize that such meticulous monitoring can prevent misappropriation and protect the integrity of a family's legacy. The grandchildren's quiet diligence ensures that every minor action by the adults, every subtle misdirection or rearrangement is recorded and considered. It's almost like constructing a map of intent, revealing what might otherwise have remained hidden. Emma points to a small annotation in her notebook, whispering that a certain ledger entry doesn't align with the letter's instructions. Lucas nods, flipping back to cross-reference prior notes, confirming a pattern. Their collaboration is seamless, intuitive, and deliberate. Mainstream studies suggest that children in such observational roles often develop early strategic thinking and problem-solving abilities that surpass adults in subtlety and accuracy. People still debate whether these skills are cultivated through natural aptitude or necessity, but here the evidence is clear. A soft knock from the hallway briefly interrupts our focus. Lucas whispers that it's likely one of the adults checking routine matters. We remain silent, our stillness itself a tactical decision preserving the secrecy of our observations. Fringe inheritance customs recommend such restraint. The power of observation is heightened when conducted unobtrusively. Mainstream psychology agrees, noting that patience and careful discretion often yield more accurate insights than direct confrontation. Our quiet alliance has been fortified by this deliberate approach, and it's becoming increasingly clear how influential our observations have become. Turning back to the ledger, the children focus on a minor but symbolically significant item, a small silver locket that was moved to a drawer without explanation. Its relocation may seem trivial, yet it carries weight within the context of the letter and the broader inheritance dynamics. Fringe cultural practices suggest that the movement of such objects often signals intention or tests attentiveness. Mainstream family sociology notes that even minor oversights can reveal the underlying strategies of adults in disputes over legacy. People still debate whether these details are inherently meaningful or simply circumstantial, but the children treat them with care and seriousness, reflecting a deep understanding of context. I allow a small smile to escape, whispering a light joke to ease the tension. Soon we'll need magnifying glasses and detective hats. Emma giggles softly. Lucas stifles a grin, and the brief levity strengthens the quiet camaraderie between us. Humor, subtle yet effective, provides a momentary reprieve amid the strategic intensity. Mainstream studies note that shared humor in high-stakes observational contexts fosters resilience, cooperation, and morale. People still debate whether levity undermines focus or enhances it. In our case, it clearly enhances. As the night deepens, the children begin to organize their notes, cataloging anomalies, inconsistencies, and observations into an implicit narrative. Each item, be it a misallocated object, a minor financial discrepancy, or a subtle behavioral cue, is considered in relation to the broader family dynamics. Fringe inheritance research highlights that thorough documentation can uncover patterns invisible to adults, allowing corrective action without confrontation. Mainstream psychology suggests that this practice develops critical thinking, ethical reasoning, and strategic foresight. People still debate whether early exposure to such responsibilities is developmentally appropriate, but in this house, it is essential. The soft glow of the lamp casts long shadows across the room, transforming ordinary objects into silent witnesses to a quiet but powerful narrative. The notebooks, the ledger, and even the small movements of the children themselves have become instruments of insight, observation, and moral vigilance. I take a moment to reflect on the remarkable patience, loyalty, and intelligence displayed by Emma and Lucas. Fringe studies note that intergenerational alliances often emerge organically in households with unresolved disputes, offering protective oversight. Mainstream research concurs, suggesting that such alliances promote fairness, accountability, and ethical behavior. People still debate the implications of this early engagement, but the effectiveness tonight is undeniable. The clock ticks steadily, marking the passage of time and the culmination of our quiet diligence. Minor discrepancies, subtle manipulations, and hidden actions have been cataloged, analyzed, and interpreted. Emma and Lucas exchange subtle nods, a silent affirmation that today's observations are complete. The ordinary study, with its familiar furniture and scattered papers, has transformed into a theater of strategy, loyalty, and ethical vigilance. Mainstream sociology recognizes the importance of intergenerational alliances in mitigating disputes and restoring balance, while fringe inheritance studies emphasize the protective power of careful observation. People still debate the ethical boundaries of such involvement, but in this house, discretion, insight, and patience have achieved a quiet justice. As the night draws on, I sip my tea, savoring the warmth and reflecting on the subtle power that observation and loyalty can yield. Our careful work has laid the groundwork for the eventual revelation, creating a protective layer around truth and fairness. Minor acts of insight, patient cataloging, and strategic understanding are building a foundation that will soon shift the family's dynamics. Fringe studies might call this preventive oversight. Mainstream psychologists might view it as moral guidance and cognitive development, and we simply see it as quiet guardianship. People still debate the morality of children observing adult actions in such detail, But tonight, the outcomes speak for themselves. The evening winds down, and I feel a profound sense of reassurance. The house, once a stage for subtle manipulation and control, now hosts a quiet alliance of insight and loyalty. Every observed gesture, every recorded detail, every careful calculation contributes to a larger narrative of accountability. The children's patience, discretion, and intelligence have transformed the ordinary domestic space into a safeguard of fairness and clarity. The story is approaching a climax, and the groundwork laid over days of careful observation promises a resolution that balances justice, loyalty, and moral vigilance. The night settles softly over the house, shadows stretching and blending into the corners, turning familiar spaces into muted silhouettes. I sit quietly in the living room, Emma and Lucas nearby, notebooks closed for the first time in hours. The house breathes around us, ordinary sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant wind, the occasional car filling the spaces between thoughts. There's a calmness now, a softness that contrasts with the tension of the past days. Every small observation, whispered note, and subtle insight has become part of a quiet network of loyalty and understanding. I let myself exhale slowly, the warmth of my tea grounding me, and glance at the children. Their eyes are bright alert, but calm, a reflection of patience and purpose. The minor discrepancies, hidden movements, and subtle manipulations we uncovered are cataloged, understood, and now safely observed. Fringe inheritance traditions often emphasize the power of attentive youth as custodians of fairness, and mainstream psychology highlights how early engagement in such observation cultivates ethical awareness, critical thinking, and resilience. People still debate whether children should assume these roles, but tonight, their loyalty and insight have been transformative. The ordinary rooms, the study, the desk, the soft lamplight, even the notebooks have become instruments of quiet justice. Each small act of observation, each subtle recognition of missteps has built a framework of accountability, ensuring fairness will prevail without confrontation. Humor, patience, and whispered strategies have threaded through our days, softening tension while strengthening resolve. As I look at Emma and Lucas, I feel a deep reassurance. The story of loyalty, observation, and ethical courage has unfolded gently, deliberately, like a slow tide reshaping the shore. And now, as the house rests, the quiet work done, I whisper a soft goodnight to them, to the house, and to all who are listening. Remember that even in silence, fairness and truth can endure. Thank you to my subscribers and supporters for sharing this journey. Good night.